you have? Pretty much all right? Okay. It's straightforward, I think. At least after 35 years, you'd think I'd have it all worked out. Okay, today we're going to work on a section that's called the context of modern organizations. And this is an area that is going to affect all of us extremely heavily well into the future. It's not anything you're going to escape because you're young or old or anything of that sort. There are four elements that I treat as the context. One is diversity, which refers to workforce diversity. We'll look at that in some detail, and we're going to use our class as an example. Second is quality management and managing for quality, which and when we get to that, I want to know about your experiences with it in any companies that you currently work for or have worked for in the past. Often this is blown off as a fad, just another thing that came down the line. And if you've ever heard the phrase total quality management, or if you're in government organizations or military organizations, they have different references, but it all means the same thing. The third item, or third context factor is technology. And that's pummeling us with the rapid changes that are going on. And I met with one of the students in the online version of this course, and Jennifer, or Heather rather, and I shared with her, because of the discussion, that when I started teaching here almost 35 years ago, first of all, this television stuff didn't exist and the internet did not exist. That most that we had in the way of communication was telephone and facsimile. Cellular phones in various forms have existed since the 1930s, especially if you were a World War II veteran and or have seen the old World War II movies where they turned a crank and held a handset to their ear and spoke into it. That was a cellular phone. It only weighed 50 pounds. And some of the early cellular phones, as I recall, were almost of equal weight. But that has changed enormously. So now you have the small cellular devices that you have. This person in the upper right is using her laptop computer with a wireless connection in this building. The wireless all over the campus. And the stuff is just amazing. And in fact, I continue to amaze myself with technology aspects, although my experience with computers goes back to 1961, when I was a computer programmer, or even earlier than that, about 1960. And now, occasionally, when we're traveling in our motorhome and going along the interstate, I can connect with my cellular telephone to the internet. And I actually communicate with these classes that way, and nobody knows necessarily where I am at any particular moment. And the third one, or fourth item in the context, is international. This is equally potent. And one of the questions I want to ask of all of you is, what countries have you visited outside the United States, if any? Don't answer the question now, I just want you to ponder it. And I'll share with you my international experience and actually what's going to be happening for me this year. So those are the four elements. They actually interact with each other in affecting what an organization and its managers can do. To illustrate these, when you are able to get into the E exercises, if you haven't already, the one for this module is a demographic profile, in which I ask you a series of questions about yourself, and I will summarize all of that into a profile of the class, and it includes the remote sites, and I don't distinguish between them all. They're as much a part of our classroom setting as we are physically together here. I have already done a preliminary demographic profile on the class based on the icebreaker E exercise, which had limited information, admittedly, but it's a way for me to get to know a little bit about you, and I told you about myself last week. The film scenes come from two films that you may not have any familiarity with whatsoever, unless you're a great fan of Jack Nicholson, who as a young actor appeared in this film called 5 Easy Pieces. There is a moment in that film that it sits in early on, and it's a peculiar scene because it doesn't seem to have much to do with the film and the theme of the film. And it's for those familiar with cinema, it's the famous restaurant scene when Jack Nicholson doesn't get exactly what he wants. And are any people here work as servers in restaurants or chefs or anything of that sort? There's one up there, there. I'll especially want your reaction, because in my experience with restaurants, it seems to me that I'm the most important living organism in the building. And I come in with that attitude. I don't try to lay it on anybody, but I want what I want within the context of what your menu allows. The second scene comes from, and it has to do with international, comes from the Japanese film Champoux, which means dandelion. Undoubtedly, you have never heard of this film, 1980-something, 89, I think. And the director was famous for highlighting aspects of Japanese culture and kind of playing with it and overstating it. So what I'll want to do with you there is to see what your sensitivity is about viewing a culture that is foreign to you. So let's give it a go with a look at the 4 topics, and the first one is workforce diversity. Now, what do we mean by that? And by the way, I'll probably stand up here too after a bit because I just don't feel like sitting down the entire time. Workforce diversity is the term that refers to variations in the workforce in an organization, that is, the variations in the demographic makeup of an organization, in which there are many different dimensions, the most obvious of which are things like a person's age, their sex, their level of education, and perhaps their racial background. But we extend it beyond those considerations to many other factors. Just based on that preliminary introduction, how would you characterize the organizations in which you work at the present time? Are they diverse or homogeneous? And please, examples if you can. You don't have to identify the organization, but in looking about at age, sex, educational background as some of the obvious dimensions of diversity, what does it look like in the systems in which you are employed, if you are employed? It helps if you speak. And then they put the camera on you. Darren will put the camera on you, and then you record it into the history. And the video from this course goes into the online courses, so you're going to get looked at by a whole lot of people. And that's probably scaring some of you. Yes?
Actually, we work in a very small organization. There's like 9 of us total, but I would say we're pretty diverse because we have pretty much every ethnicity, as well as I'm the youngest one, I'm 21, the oldest one is probably 50. So it's a pretty good range.
That is a good range.
About equal female and male ratios.
About equal, you said? Mm-hmm. Okay. Others? I would like examples from you before I... Yes?
My job, it's primarily males, ages 30 to 40. It's a motorcycle shop, so that's primarily who's interested in working there. We have 2 females who work there, but they work in a separate side of the building. They deal in the accounting, so they don't really have all the interaction that we have.
You know, that's absolutely fascinating, because there's an underlying stereotype, and this is not intended as a criticism or offensive, that only the guys work on the bikes and the gals do the bookkeeping.